surprising to me that after 220 odd episodes that you and I have recorded together, we haven't done one on the inner critic.
We haven't?
No, because we did a workshop on the inner critic. Do you remember? We didn't want to
Yeah,
give all our secrets away.
that's right. But we did do a workshop. I was like, we have talked about it though.
We have. I've
Hmm.
talked about it a lot, but only to people who've paid to hear it.
You wanted to do this one, and I'm curious why.
Actually, the reason why it was forefront in my mind was because I saw Marcus Kane on Instagram and he was talking about the inner critic and he was quoting another psychoanalyst who says that the inner critic comes from, all those external voices, the external judgments, everything from the outside that we internalize becomes the inner critic. And I have some thoughts about that, but I'm
Hmm.
first of all interested in whether you agree or disagree or partially agree.
That it's always an externally derived source or that it's cultural, or
I
both.
guess, yeah, a mix of that.
Well, it's interesting that you ask because I've been thinking about it recently with in its intersection with shame. Because is it an assumption that if we have an inner critic that it's also maybe the personified shame thoughts? I don't know. Now I'm asking you a question. It's not helpful. But I was thinking about how I think I used to have an inner critic that came from my own internalized shame. And I was thinking about like, was my shame actually externally driven? Was that assigned to me just culturally? Is it assigned to all of us? But I think I lately have been wondering if it's just a feeling, like it's just part of being human. I don't know that I believe anymore so much that everything, I think lots of it, but I don't know if I think everything is always like the internalized voice of the parent that criticized you or the culture that you're not good enough for. I think that's certainly there. But I think maybe even in the absence of all that, it might still be there. And it might be something that is adaptive or in our DNA or just part of being a human being and having a full scope of emotion.
So then, do you think that any shame thoughts about us being wrong in some way is inner critic thoughts?
That's the question.
Yes.
Um, Not necessarily.
Cool. So
Why? Why do you?
what do you mean? What do you mean? Why? We're
Well,
having a conversation about this. So why wouldn't I ask you that? Sorry.
I thought I don't know if you were gonna be like, oh, I disagree, and that's a good jumping off point, or if you're
No,
like,
no,
shoot,
no,
I
I know.
agree, and that's not a good. Now
I
we're gonna
know.
do that
No, I
thing.
know. It just made me laugh.
Mm.
So what I started doing is dividing it into one of two categories, which I call the introjector and the concluder. So the introjector is exactly this that we're talking about, an amalgamation of all the ways that people have inferred or explicitly told you that you were wrong or not matching up, or all the cultural pressures, right? So we internalize that, and then that becomes part of our inner psyche. But then we have the other side, which I think is in alignment with what you're talking about, whether it's shame speaking, which
Mm.
is the concluder, which is the part of us that draws conclusions about ourselves. Now, can that exist without external pressure? That's another question that we may get to. An example of this would be a 10-year-old who's sitting on a wall next to a friend, and maybe they're both wearing shorts. She looks at her friend's legs, looks at her own, and goes, "Oh, my legs are too big." Nobody said that to her. That was just a thought that her own mind concluded, having looked out to the world. So it wasn't this direct message that came in. This could happen maybe even in a culture where, I don't know, could it?
I know
Because it
that's the
would also need
question.
watering. It would need watering. I think the thought could
Mm.
come up, but it would need watering over the years and confirmation in some way that the body's wrong. And how it often shows up if you're trying to tell the difference is if you listen to that voice in your head, that inner critic, is it speaking in the first or second person? So is it I or is it you? This fascinates me. And I
Yeah.
draw people's attention to it all the time. My clients, when they're jumping in and out of you and I often hear that as the introjector is the you and the concluder is the I.
Interesting. Because I was thinking about you and I, not you and me, but you and I
I'm always
as
thinking about you and I.
I was thinking about you and I in terms of my own self-talk recently, and I can't remember exactly because I wasn't paying attention to it before, if I always used one or the other. But I now say I, but I don't, it's not criticism. It's not shame. It's just when I'm like, darn it, Steph. I, like I'm kind of I think I have
That's
a
pretty
I
third
just use third
person, yeah.
person, but I'll say like, why do I always do that? You know, like I'll say that, but it doesn't feel like you're so bad. But that's the opposite. Like to me, the shame comes from the you, and the I feels a little bit more like I'm here with myself. So anyway, I don't know if it's universal or not. Um,
No, it's not. The I, no, to me, the I is way more soaked in shame for me.
yeah,
Because the way you're describing a moment where you're kind of a bit exasperated with yourself,
yeah,
I'm thinking of like a dark moment where you really feel like, and I mean, tell me if you just never have these moments anymore, but a dark moment where you just feel the shame's there. Because there's a difference with, so when I'm on my phone and I get caught in a scrolling loop, I will go, Sarah, for goodness sake, and I will call myself out on it. And I'll sometimes just chuck my phone down to try and break the spell of the
yeah.
scrolling. And that's exasperated. That's not shame. That's not inner critic.
Uh-huh.
That is a little bit like in the intro, the question about self-discipline. Again, that word has all kinds of connotations, but it's that part of me that's calling myself out and going like, no, 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 stop this. This isn't okay. We don't like this.
Right, so it's helpful there in a way.
Yes.
It's almost
Yes.
like a firm parent.
Yes. It's exasperated though. So I would say that I do talk to myself in
Yeah,
exasperated
but
tones
it's not
sometimes.
shame.
Well, I'm sure there are. This is the problem because when I sit here with you and we talk about the podcast, I'm like, yeah, I'm not feeling shame right now. So I'm pretty sure I hardly ever feel shame now. But if I really,
Yeah. Yes.
search back in those little moments when it comes up, because this is what happens, isn't it, Steph? You and I both talked about this when we're editing the podcast and we
Hmm.
hear ourselves going, oh, we don't do that anymore. And I'm thinking, hang on a second, I did that the other day. And I'm really not
Yes, I
trying to be
know.
insincere on the podcast
Yeah,
because that's just not the state I'm in. That's not the part of me
agree.
that's speaking.
I totally agree. And I think it's because we have different parts that have come out at different times. But I've been exploring this. And I think that before, in most of my adolescence and definitely in my 20s and 30s to some extent, I had an inner critic that presented like you think about an inner critic, like thoughts, whether it was you or I. It was still meh, 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 about me.
Hmm.
And I don't have that so much now. I have the exasperation like Steph when it's almost like talking to myself, but it's not like this background thing. And I thought that meant that I don't carry shame anymore. And I think in one of the podcast episodes we did on the other podcast, I said at some point, I don't feel like I am in touch with shame. But that's because I think I was thinking about it like this inner critic, like some
Hmm.
voice in my head that had these things to say, because that's what it used to be. And I don't have that anymore. But I noticed recently that anytime I have anyone accuse me of something on social media, it's mostly on social media, to be honest. I put a reel out recently of an opinion I had, and it was a very controversial topic. And there are a lot of people who don't follow at all, who just the reel made its way to their algorithm, and they were just like, "What do you know? Blah 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 blah." No, this, that, the other, and that didn't inspire any voices in my head because I don't do that to myself anymore. I don't talk to myself like that anymore. But I felt heat and darkness in my body that I was like so distraught and so against logic. I just felt shame. And I was like, this is shame. I feel shame even though my brain is like, what are you talking about? Like, it's a difference of opinion. This is going to happen. My brain was on board with me in places where it used to be like, oh, yeah, I'm going to get on the shame bandwagon too, and it doesn't do that anymore because I'm more self-allied. So I thought, I don't have this, but I have the feeling come up, and it comes up when somebody else shakes their finger at me. That's where I experience shame. And I am trying to decide if that's inner criticism, if is that an inner critic? I'm not really sure. I
Hmm.
don't have the inner critic that talks negatively to me anymore. Um,
Yeah.
and that's what I'm saying, is the inner critic shame personified, or is it a different
Hmm.
thing?
Well, this is not answering the question, but it's thinking of the listener who's hearing you say, I used to have an awful inner critic, like loud, constant, nitpicking. I don't know why I said that. No, why
Sure.
not say that?
Yeah.
Nitpicking at me. Just sounded weird and out of context. People are going to want to know, most importantly, how did you dissolve or get rid of your inner critic? How? If you can give us a 10-step formula, and I'm going to get a notepad and pen because I think this
Yeah.
is going to be gold.
Yeah, because I don't know why I haven't done this before. Um, well, the secrets we're told in our workshop. Um, And for me, it was the fierce self-compassion. So I have a little bit of like, and I don't know why, but part of my personality is just like, that's ridiculous. Like, I'm just like, I think a lot of the things I used to criticize myself for are ridiculous. It's like, who, why? What am I? I'm supposed to be this perfect person who does this X, Y, and Z. Like, says who? It was just this doubt in the culture. And I think that my general tendency to be at odds with the culture has actually helped me a lot because a lot of my shame potentially was cultural values, you know? And
Mhm.
so for me to reject those and think critically about why I don't even agree with these rules. I think they're actually impossible. Like and so that part of me became a voice of fierce self-compassion that really talks like that in my head.
Mhm.
And I
Mhm.
and that's what I started to do and just to be like, I don't actually believe these things. I don't value these things that the culture values. And while a part of me does in some cases, like with body image, I still would have some of those. They're not my values, but they're still ingrained as with I guess all cultural things, but I firmly and resolutely and repeatedly would have this practice for so many years. Now it's automatic of like, no, I actually just don't agree and find it actually a little bit ridiculous. And that voice became my dominant voice.
Mhm. Mhm. So, okay, to try and tease out the steps that you refused to give to us, um, there was an externalization that happened. So you were internalizing these things, and there was that it was a no.
Hmm.
And that fierce compassion is really saying no. One of the examples of fierce compassion is when you catch yourself beating up on yourself, you just go, no, no, I'm not speaking to myself like that.
Yeah.
You're not trying to say, no, it's okay. No, I'm not a failure. No, my body is okay. No, you're not trying to argue with the inner critic. There's a part of you, a fiercer part, that can recognize, and this is what needs to happen really for anything to shift, to recognize this is not serving you. Because for as long as you think it is, for as long as you think you need the inner critic, you won't be able to go anywhere. But I think there's the point that a lot of people get to where they're going, I
Mm.
don't like this. And it's not actually making me show up better in my life. It's not making me more productive. It's
Yeah.
turning me, it's actually paralyzing me even more. Um, so I'm hearing that. I'm hearing externalization. And I'm hearing you getting a bit mad about it as
Yeah.
well.
Yes.
So that reaction to people piling in on your post and disagreeing, that
Mm.
feeling that you had in your body was anger, but the shame turned it inwards. Shame is anger
I know.
turned towards. Whereas I know for me, in those situations, someone starts coming at me, my immediate response is to be angry with them,
I
even
would.
if they have a point. So
Mm.
there's an initial flare of anger. And
Hmm.
then quite often I've had comments on YouTube and stuff like that that have initially flared defensiveness and anger. And I've looked at it again, I've gone like, okay, is there a point here? And then I've been able
Yeah.
to like recognize and see their point of view and try to acknowledge that in my response as well. Sometimes the inner
Ooh.
critic needs to be met with anger, not kindness. But this is my theory
Yeah.
here as well. With the inner critic, if it is the introjector, what we need is anger and externalization. If it's the concluder, I think we need validation and some reassurance.
Yes, I completely agree. I think a lot of my inner critic that I was just talking about was interjector. Well, that's what I started to understand it as. And then that
Hmm.
is where that anger came in. But let's move this even to that second part because what happens to me is that despite the anger and refusal of like I don't agree, I will still sometimes have this feeling that I've done something wrong that goes against all the logic. And the only thing that helps me is validation. It is
Hmm.
the only thing and at this point in my life, it doesn't come from me. I need it externally. I really need to feel I need to check.
Hmm. Yeah.
Am I safe? Am I okay? And I need enough people to tell me that like they understand my point of view.
Hmm.
And I need that external validation to some degree. And that is a work in progress that I can't necessarily come to that myself unless like a lot of time goes by. But I still have that shame. And then I'd start to think, well, maybe that's part of a process. I think about shame like it's this evil monster from trauma that's just darkness and it's, I don't know, like it's not ours. And maybe
Hmm.
it's not, but I also think potentially it's just a feeling. It's a feeling like other feelings because I experience it the same way as I experience anger or other things that kind of rise, and then fall. And if it's that, then I don't know, it feels easier to deal with. And maybe that's part of what helps us handle that concluder, is that
Hmm.
this might be a passing, this might be a moment. I don't want to make conclusions here. You know what I mean? I
Yes.
don't want to do that. And that's where that flooding we've talked about comes in as well.
Well, so often core beliefs about ourselves are things we have. Well, no, they can be concluded or introjected, actually. And most of the time, though, if we've concluded something about ourselves when we were kids, we're concluding with a very immature brain that
Right.
can't know all the facts. Once it gets in, it can be sticky to get out, and I think it can just flare up. It can flare up when those neural networks
Yes.
are triggered by something.
Yes.
So for me, if I just think about some of the things I might get frustrated myself, like
Mm.
there's this core belief that I get carried away without thinking. I think without acting, and that it's really stupid. There's this core belief that I think I can do more than I can. So I then have these ideas, I'm going to do X, Y, Z, and I'm inevitably going to fail. So there are certain situations where, in a vulnerable moment, that flares up. And I would say it often flares up in the you, but I don't know where that came from because I could honestly say I was fortunate enough to be brought up by parents that kind of instilled in me I can do what I want.
Hmm.
Like, especially my dad, like he's got like this, he has this unshakable confidence in himself and his ability. And I think because we're similar, he projects that onto me.
Yeah.
So I've kind of absorbed some of that too. But then there's a part of me that gets um that thinks I'm just deluding myself. We're back to that. You have spoken about delusion as well. It's like it's an old fear that comes up, and anytime I think something's going to work, not anytime, sometimes when I think something's going to work out a certain way and it doesn't, it's to kind of collapse into that, like you're an idiot for thinking it was going to be different.
So if it wasn't learned,
Mm.
did it ever at any point hurt you that you were that this happened? Like did it go south at any point that you internalized then that the vulnerability is too high and we need a self-critic in there to prevent that?
Do you know what? I think it was modeling. I think I saw my dad making a lot of plans and they rarely happened.
Okay.
So he would always go,
All
I'm going to
right.
do this. I'm going to do that. He was even doing this today. He's going to come back to the hospital and he's going to cook meals for the nurses and this, that, and the other. And I know he believes he's going to do it when he says it. He won't.
Yeah.
And
I
so I think I saw that in him and I very quickly lost faith in what he said. So he would say things that would sound so exciting. And I remember friends of mine would hear and be like, oh my goodness, that's amazing. Okay, it's not going to happen. And then it didn't. There must have been some times when it did, but my memory is that it never
yeah.
did.
And did you have feelings about that?
Yeah. Well, I think I felt
Did you feel
there must have
disgust?
been a there must have been a point I was discussed. I felt oh, do you know the word that came up then? Oh, I don't like it. It's not a nice color on me. It doesn't suit me. Contempt was what I felt then.
Yeah.
Mm,
Because those will code something. Those are
mm,
strong, right? Disgust, contempt. Like,
mm.
that would be a reason to be like, oh, I don't want to be like that. And I know I can
Yes.
be like that. And so
Yes. Oh my goodness, it's so true. So true.
I think you're bringing up a good point about parents, because now that I'm thinking about it, all of my core beliefs too. I've had this conversation with Mike where I've been like, I don't know why this is something I feel shame about. It's not even something I feel like I do. This isn't one of the things I feel like is a weakness, but they're my
Hmm.
parents. They're my parents' weaknesses that I have disgust for, like that I
Yes.
have felt disgust for. And I've been like, I won't be like that. And I was talking to a client yesterday who was going on and on and on about her mother and her mother and the way her mother does it. And she's talking and she's like, and she always just pretends that the thing isn't going to exist and that it's just going to go away by itself. And as she's talking, we're realizing, and she said, I realize as I'm talking, this is exactly what we talk about. Like, this is exactly the thing I do. And I wonder how much when our inner critic doesn't make sense, or maybe when it comes from a place that wasn't explicitly understood by us as instilled, that maybe it's from observation of people close to us.
Yeah. Oh, I think, we talk about kids being a mirror for their parents. It's vice versa. If we see that in the parent and we feel a whole way about it, anytime we catch a fringe, the edges of that in ourselves, we're
Yeah.
likely to have a similar
Yeah.
reaction. So you'll say, you're not like your parents in that way, but whatever it is, it's a human trait. So there are probably times when you at
Yeah.
least skim the edge of that, and then it's like, oh my goodness, like,
Yeah. I
I
don't
don't
want to
like
be
this.
that.
Yeah.
But that brings us to what we can do, because
Mhm.
I'm going to tell you a story. I went to my parents, I went to visit them last weekend. And my dad has a boat. This is his life dream. And we went out on the boat and he was so happy to bring us out and we had lunch out there and he's driving the boat back to the house. And I don't know the rules of the sea, but he must have done something wrong. Like, I don't know, the wake was too big or whatever. And the boat passing honked, like beeped, kind of like,
Hmm.
hey. And I watched this happen and I watched my dad register that that he'd done something that he wasn't supposed to do. And he went, and my dad's usually really defensive. He's quick to anger. He does not hold criticism well, but he's softening in his age. But he registered it and he kind of nodded to the guy like, "Oh, sorry." And then he said something to my mom like, I X, Y, and Z. And just went and just he like course corrected. And I was watching him and thinking, that is exactly the social media thing that I do where I'm like, and I will internalize shame. And if that had happened to me, I would have been like, I just know that I would have had a whole shame thing happen for a little while before I would have been able to take on the fact that like all I had to do was fix my behavior next time. Like, and I thought about him and I thought about like, that's really helpful modeling for me because I can see another human being told they've done something wrong without making it mean anything more than what it was. And for me to watch him, and maybe it's important that it was him,
Hmm.
um, be able to do that, I think helped me give myself a template of thinking about it. Number one, because it helped me understand like what behavior might look like when you don't get upset and let it drag you down, but also to help me understand this happens to people. Even my dad, who has, symbolism for me as like, he's still my dad, right? Like he still has some like power of being larger than human. And
Hmm.
even him, can do something wrong and be called out without it meaning that he's any less. And I can
Yeah.
understand that watching him. And it was helpful for me. And I took that and I just like put it in my little mental notebook. And I was like, the next time that happens, I'll remember what that felt like or what it felt like to witness that and what it might have felt like to project myself onto how he might have been feeling. So I think modeling essentially
Yes.
is the tool
Yes.
here.
The power that it holds because it's your dad compared to if
Mhm.
you just seen me do that or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
it's your original model of what you're supposed to be, maybe.
Yeah. I don't know, yeah. So much.
But
So
yeah.
complicated. Yeah.
I,
Well, I
I
think
I'm
a big,
gonna disagree. I've watched you do stuff and I've internalized it too with boundaries. And I've been like, that's good.
yeah.
That's cool. She does, and I've
Yeah.
used it.
Yeah. Oh, I'm not saying that you wouldn't internalize anything from somewhere else, but I guess there's certain things, especially a trait that you might link a certain way
Hmm.
with your dad. I don't know. There's something about seeing a parent do that,
Yeah, you're right.
you know, and
Yeah.
actually watching my dad while he's ill, going through it with zero self-pity and zero fear. I'm looking at that as this modeling point and trying to embody some of that as my back's hurting and this is
Yeah.
grumbling and that's grumbling. And I straight away, my mind wants to catastrophize and throw myself a big pity party.
Yeah.
And I'm remembering my dad, not in a self-shaming way, not in a, oh, I shouldn't have my feelings about it way. It's really not that. But it's this whole, yeah, watching him is just, I think, well, if he can do it, and
Mm.
I'm so similar to him, then
And I can do it.
I should jolly well be able to do it
Darren?
as well. His blood runs through my veins.
Well, how does the inner critic speak to that? Do you hear them or do you feel them conceptually?
There is some self-judgment that I experience that comes up not all the time, but comes up around my propensity to collapse into defeat and self-pity. I'm much better now, much, much more often, probably a lot of the time I'd like to think, better at recognizing, okay, I'm experiencing these feelings of self-pity and defeat, and they're going to pass. I'm not trying to fight with them, they're going to pass. But at what point is it like emotional bypassing versus going, I would like to be able to have a different emotional experience in this situation?
Probably if you can't hold it at all. I- And I actually think potentially I don't say shame. I don't know if you have to go that far, but
Mm-hmm.
some of this self-doubt is healthy,
Mm-hmm.
right? And I think
Yeah.
that's what inner criticism adapted from, is the ability to question oneself so that we could grow and
Yeah.
evolve.
Yeah. Yeah.
But if you
I
shut that
think,
down,
Yeah.
then that would be bypassing, I think.
Shut which part down? The defeat and
The,
self-pity?
the doubt, the judgment even. I don't want to say judgment, but like your capacity to say, I don't know if this is, just sort of doubt this and have a little bit of what becomes self-judgment. That part to me is your confrontation of something rather than your bypassing of it. Because if you just went straight to, I can do whatever I want. This is a good way, and went right to the positive feelings without questioning where it doesn't serve you,
Mm-hmm.
that is bypassing to me. I think to be able to hold both.
Yes, yes. I also think when we're not being emotionally honest with ourselves, if we are at least partially connected to our bodies tell us.
Yeah.
A little bit like lie detector tests, right? Somebody can be in a very relaxed state, just telling an easy lie, and there's still a reaction in the body that's
Yes.
going, "You're not being truthful here,"
Yes. Unless you're a psychopath.
unless you're a psychopath.
They don't
Yeah.
lie detect, but that
Okay.
goes to show.
I don't think I'm one of those. Um, but
No, I wasn't suggesting you were, Sarah.
I didn't think
But our
either. But
bodies
just
tell.
taking a moment to consider it, just to self-doubt a moment. Don't just, I'm not going to just
I don't want to
bypass into
bypass
assuming I'm not a
toxic
psychopath.
positivity.
I think so, no, right?
You're no psychopath.
People that have a brutal inner critic running through their mind as almost a near constant part of their experience.
Hmm.
When it's that constant and that the inner critic and the feelings that the inner critic produces, that constant shame just feels like who you are. You talked about, fierce compassion was a big part of shifting that. And there must have been the part of you. Can you remember when you first heard about fierce compassion and the part of you that could connect to that? Because it's almost like there has to be some sense of self-protection in there.
Yeah, I didn't hear about it first. Most things I heard about later, but I found it in myself first. So it was anger. I
Mm.
I I think what drew me to anger, I think I have to say that it's part of me. Anger is something I was raised in. So like I used it. Like it wasn't that weird to me.
Hmm.
But what turned it outward instead of inward? Learn education. I started to learn other perspectives than the one I was raised with. A lot of the things I had shame about were things that my dad shoulded. Like, you
Hmm.
should XYZ, you should be XYZ. And I grew up with that, and that was the messaging I assumed was the fact. And then I got on social media. I got on Instagram and I started to read about, I think it was like concepts like feminism. I started to read about hustle culture. It wasn't even called that then. Just the idea of rest, the idea of not constantly producing, all of these things that now are really part of the mainstream conversation. I was on the fringes of that, listening to people, taking it in. And the second I started having other thoughts and other opinions come in, I was like, yeah, I actually really agree with this. This makes a lot of sense. It resonated in me. And then I started to just question. And this is why I think critical thinking is such an important thing to think about. Like, does this actually make sense to me? Do the judgments I make about myself, including how I think my body needs to look at all costs to the detriment of my entire life at this point? Like, does this make sense? And that doubt became a seed for no, like, no, it actually doesn't to me. And then there were more voices that were talking about that. And I think, as I think about this sometimes, I'm like, if there weren't voices, I don't know, that
Hmm.
I wouldn't have felt safe enough to believe these things. You know?
Yeah, well, when you were talking about like the idea of validation and needing that external validation, it made me think of something that often happens in therapy. People come to therapy in all their trauma and their shame. And one of the things that the therapists usually do is we validate their emotional experience. It's like we validate it first where they can't validate it for themselves. And then
Yeah,
ideally we want to use this introjection process, this
right.
internalization process that previously was used for all the critical stuff to get in to bring in that sense of then being able to start offering that to yourself. So I think just kind of bouncing back to what you were saying before, there are areas of our life perhaps where we do need that external validation first before we can find it in ourselves. It's just not accessible.
Yes. And then you get into the conversations around at what point do you need something else? Because I think there's like a period of validation we need, but then we
Hmm.
could get locked into self-pity
Yes.
there. But we need validation to be, I think, to be safe enough to be able to question ourselves. Because if we've never been validated, to go in and start questioning is
Mm-hmm.
going to be like, but I'm not feeling even like I'm seen. So, I'm going to question myself. I don't have enough to stand on. But I also think that sometimes self-criticism is not just about what we believe, but also what we need in the nervous system. I was trying not to do it, but
Hey,
like
you got pretty far in without
I
saying
did.
the NS word.
Is there a different template I could use? Because it's just one way of talking about things, but patterns. It's potentially when you're in a pattern of being held back, of staying small, if you're comfortable there, you need self-criticism to keep you there. It's a way of keeping the status quo in the way that your whole life can be built, right? So even where you have people validating or questioning, there might, if that's not enough, if that feels like it's not doing something, I think that's a place where we start to look at, is there a need to be, or a belief that we do need to be kept small, and that is a safer place to be. Because I think we can create the self-criticism
Mhm.
almost subconsciously, purposefully, even where it doesn't make sense.
Well, that nicely leads me on to the question that I wanted to ask. Is the inner critic trying to help in some way?
Yes,
Usually or always?
I think always.
Hmm. I think it's a helpful way to frame it, regardless of, any objective truth that we could ever uncover or not uncover. Because even if you have an inner critic that's telling you you're a POS and that you shouldn't even be alive, I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've worked with people in that place, and actually, what it is, it's trying to relieve pain.
Yeah,
Because a lot of the time, people in that position, it's not that they want to die; they just don't want to live
right.
in this pain. So I think it's almost trying to help you to either helping you to be safe, to feel better. I was going to say protection, but I guess that's safety. So really, is it just safety or?
I mean, that's my premise.
Of course it is.
I
And where
think
do we feel safe, Steph? Where do we feel it?
I mean, I think at our core, we are trying to survive and we're trying to evolve. I think that's how we're made.
Hmm.
And so even in what appears to be the most self-sabotagey behaviors, that is still part of the instinct. It's just that, like binge eating, it gets a little carried away with itself and it becomes maybe even functionally autonomous.
Yeah.
Where then it turns into, it starts as that, and then it might turn into a whole other thing. And I think some intervention is needed. And that's is where I don't think we need to be like, self-criticism is the best. I'm going to walk away from it. Like, it's helpful to a point. And then we have to sort of renegotiate how it gets carried away with itself, I think.
Hmm. Hmm. Well, back to your question about validation and then what next. I think what the validation does, because the validation to me is the understanding of the emotional experience. So when you feel validated, it's like, oh, these feelings and these experiences make sense. And so it's one of the first steps to self understanding.
Mhm.
And then to go further into self understanding, I would say that we need, I use the word compassion, but some sense of goodwill or generosity towards ourselves about what we might find. Because if the self judgment flares up too intensely, we're going to tumble straight back into shame and go right back to where we were before.
It's hard. I mean, I'm thinking about the theory of that because if I apply that to the places where I feel like I've really overcome certain things,
Hmm.
I'm like, yeah, that's when I needed it. That's how I did it. And now I'm thinking of like, well, where's the places I still feel it? It's still in these spaces of feeling misunderstood. That's where
Yeah.
shame comes in.
Hmm.
And it's not about not being, well, even when I'm validated, it lingers.
Hmm.
And it's like, what is it that I'm actually needing there? Because I give
Well,
myself these things.
the validation isn't necessarily to get rid of the feeling. The validation is that the feeling is there and it helps the feeling to make sense and puts it into perspective of going like, yeah, this feeling is up. This is a feeling in my body. I've experienced it before. Like, this is however it is that we
Hmm.
understand that within the validation of that.
Maybe that's the stepping stone to be able to get to the next piece, which might be different for everybody. For me, it's logic. It comes with time. I think that there's a time element of it too, but I wonder if without the validation, it would just keep going,
Mm-hmm.
you know.
Well, the opposite of the validation is making yourself wrong and the self-judgment. So if you think what the absence of validation is, so the minute you feel the way you do, I you're wrong. Like this feeling is telling you something that's completely true about you and who you are. The validation is the perspective bit. So
Mm.
I'm trying to think if there's any other words that whether it is always validation as such that
Company.
well, it's recognition without judgment, which I guess is a type of validation.
Yeah,
It's kind of
validation's a
going,
good
of
word.
course, this feeling is here, given your history, given what happened, given like the entirety of everything, this feeling is going to be triggered in this moment.
Yeah, there's something though about being validated means somebody can see your point. Somebody can see where you're coming from, and that feels like company. And that is the social need, right? Like that
Mm-hmm.
we need to feel like we're not out in the middle of the jungle and nobody's actually there. Like,
Yeah.
and realizing I am alone in this.
Aren't we all really just alone in our own heads? No one else can be in our worlds. We
I
don't even
know.
know if anybody else is in our worlds. Maybe we're all here on our own.
Yeah, I think we're in a video game. The more AI. I'm like, we are totally in a video game.
Yeah.
We are, somebody is like moving their little controller, being like, I'm gonna take her out of the podcast and put her
We're just gonna fuck some
see
shit
how
up
she
here.
reacts.
Just bouncing back to the question that we posed at the top of the episode around the idea of softening, befriending, or reframing the inner critic. Befriending. Let's talk about befriending.
I think about that's changing the tone of voice.
Hmm.
So an inner critic could be like, nah, 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 nah. Or it could be like, I have a suggestion. Or I've noticed that,
Yeah.
this is going to leak into a different way of thinking about it. But a friend also might be the type of person who would say, there's something that I do observe, and there's something that I have noticed about the way you behave. Although a friend wouldn't say this.
But also
I
you're
can't.
suggesting it's the critic who becomes a friend, where this is talking about befriending the critic. So that's us speaking back to the critic.
Yeah. Uh,
Yeah. So
I'm,
you're speaking as the critic, how the
I'm
critic
speaking
might
as,
speak as a friend. But
well,
some people's
mm,
critics are I mean, think about the anorexic voice.
yeah,
You know, it's often likened to psychosis. It is that
I
rigid,
know.
that unyielding. It doesn't want to be your friend.
Well, then you're not going to be, then you're going to need an inner parent.
Hmm.
You need a third party.
Yeah. Say more about the inner parent stuff.
Well, you need a different you need a new voice, because if
Yeah.
the inner critic, and yes, the inner critic can become so embedded and so rigid that it's not going to change. You're not going to, yeah, it's not going to evolve. But then that's where we're like, okay, then we need to bring a different voice in, which is typically the inner parent, which has a different perspective than the inner critic, which was probably formed at younger ages when we were more logical and had less resources to validate,
Yes.
or understand ourselves. So having the voice of, I totally see.
Hmm.
Even to say, and to say it kindly, or to say, I think, and this is part of the push pull of this conversation. There's something about validating and like assuming that the critic is wrong completely,
Hmm.
which sometimes it is, but sometimes the critic has points, and it's this effort to try to help us evolve. But we cannot evolve if somebody's being so mean and rude, right? Like that's not what's going to happen. But you can evolve if the voice is coming from a really befriended place. And so for my inner critic to come in and say, what if you thought of it like this? Or like maybe this is what this person on social media is saying, and that you could look at that actually. Maybe that is a place where you could learn. If I hear it coming that way, I'm going to move towards that voice.
Hmm.
I'm going to feel more supported by that voice, and I'm more likely to befriend that voice. But if I hear, oh, you should just get off social media, you fool. What were you thinking? You got away with it this long? It's fun to do in a microphone. Um,
You also went a little bit more Italian then, so that's telling.
Did I? I thought I went Dracula. Um, but that's that's where like the tone of voice matters, and who's talking to you is going to be, it's like who would you as a child move towards when I was a child?
What was the exercise we did in the workshop again? You know the one that was so it's like you
Hmm.
think of something that you criticize yourself about, and you acknowledge that, and you also offer the alternative. or the
Yeah,
as well as.
it was like the light. Was that the one about the light you put on things? Like if I'm impulsive
Yes.
or spontaneous,
Yes.
like
Yes, exactly.
like looking at the side of it that could be a positive thing or an asset, which is a little bit
Yes.
different.
Yes.
But we also did one, you're right, on like I can hold two truths
Hmm.
of which is similar, but
Yeah, there's ones of kind of when we get very black and white about something and we say, okay, I'm an idiot for I get carried away. The opposite to that is just being quite enthusiastic to connect with
yeah,
people.
I'm jovial and
Yes. Yes.
passionate.
I'm not afraid to make a fool of myself.
Yeah.
Or
I
I am
mean,
afraid, but I do it anyway.
yeah. Sometimes I think the inner critic needs to be challenged
Hmm.
and maybe bring in other perspectives. Sometimes I think we stay in inner criticism because there's something we're not challenging.
Hmm.
And that's why it keeps coming back. And that's where I have personally felt like there's a self confrontation here I'm afraid of. And as long as I keep looking at the bright side, that's why the critic keeps re entering to be like, but we do need to look at this other place. It's just that being able to do that requires a great amount of tolerance and safety. So
Hmm.
that's why we tend not to look at it. But I think it could be a call either way.
Yeah. But in order to do that, there needs to be some kind of acceptance of our fallibility as humans, that
Yeah.
we make mistakes, that we get it wrong, that we are selfish and thoughtless, and we're also kind and thoughtful. We're all those different things. But how I think I don't like to talk as general as that, but I'm gonna. I think people struggle to embrace the shadow side.
Yeah. Right. That was our workshop. Talking about the shadow
Yeah.
side. I also think it's harder when we're not validated. So I think it depends. I think there's like tiers of it,
Yeah.
to work with, but
Yeah.
depending on what your personal place with it is.
Yeah. But, all that talk about external validation as well. I wonder whether we could do an episode about needing external validation.
Let's think about it. We'll come
Yeah,
back next
maybe.
month.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye. I don't know, like, bye.
Bye.